So, hello guys, welcome to the next APIForce session. How are you doing today?
Good.
Not bad, not bad.
Great. So I will be sharing my screen. You should be able to see my screen now.
Awesome, yes.
Great. So what will be the topic for today? It will be CICD, because after our last LinkedIn post, we received a lot of feedback, which was very nice. Thank you very much for this. And we also received feedback that we should do a session about CICD and then really implement the CICD pipeline, because I think at the moment there is quite a lot material available, but it's maybe not fully covering all the different aspects of CICD, really like from the very beginning to the very end. So we thought to set up a series in our dev shooting sessions, where we really go into the different topics of CICD, really from the very, very beginning to the very end.
Okay.
Cool. So, Andy, quick question. Are we going to do the coding and so on today already, or?
We are not going to do the coding today because one of the most important things when talking about CICD is really like the process or the concept which we will be implementing in CICD. And that's actually what I want to talk about today with you guys. So how could the CICD setup look like? And then define what we are going to implement in the next few sessions. How does that sound for you? Good.
I think that's great. Just one question, because then it would be also interesting to know for the people that for the next time in the next session, what platform are we going to use to set up the CI/CD pipelines?
That's a very good question. So I will be doing with Git Actions. Because this was my most recent project I implemented, and I already have some of the code snippets available. So for me, it would be Git Actions, but it would be great if you would add maybe into the comments of this video, like which tool you are using. And maybe we can also provide some inputs or some code snippets if you are using, for example, Jenkins or whatever pipeline you are using there.
So we are going to, in the upcoming videos, we are going to set it up from the scratch, right?
That's absolutely correct. So we will be setting up from the scratch the entire CI/CD. The main tool we will be using will be Git Actions. But as you know, CI/CD is also including like a lot of other tools like MUnit, Artifactory, SonarQube, etc. So we will be also using those kind of tools. But yeah, we will covering all those features and tools then in the upcoming sessions.
Okay, nice.
Great. So before we start with CI/CD, and what I usually do is I really try to draft the concept or the process how we want to implement CI/CD. Because there are always like different views from developers, DevOps, or architects on how CI/CD should be implemented. And in my opinion, I mean, every concept or process has its advantages and disadvantages. The most important thing is that you really discuss the concept or the process with the entire team, so that everybody's really aware on the different steps in the entire CI/CD process. And therefore, I took your draft, Amir. I slightly changed it to what you posted. I hope that's okay for you.
Completely fine. Just one question. Is it possible to do it in presentation mode? so we
Yeah,
see the slides.
Yeah, it's a little bit small. Yeah.
sure. Is it
Perfect.
better now?
Much better.
Great. So this is how the entire CI/CD should look like then in the end of this series. We will be setting up 4 different environments. So it will be dev, QA, staging, and a prod environment. And then for each environment, we will be doing like different steps in the CI/CD. We will get into detail of this process in just a few seconds. But I want to first talk about the CI/CD maturity model or framework. And usually when I start a CI/CD project, it doesn't make sense if you implement already in the very beginning all the different kind of tools like we see it here. So with like static code analysis, with performance testing, with like all the different kinds of features, because the project or the CI/CD will be very complex. It's going to use a lot of time. So I'm really a friend of this maturity model. And what it basically tells you is that you should start first very lean, like with the very base of CI/CD, and then build the different tools and the different features up to this base in order to get a higher maturity in CI/CD. There may be a question to you guys. What do you think about this kind of maturity model? Have you seen this as well on one of the projects?
I personally have not seen like a maturity model framework, but typically, yes, there is always that we start with the base, okay, with like this really simple approach with just, let's say, you do just a build and then deployment to development environments. And then at some point you enhance your pipeline with multiple additional stages, tests, and so on. And this comes by time. And I think it's interesting to know what is the time frame from starting at the earliest level, base, and then until you end up to really like maturity level 3, like for example, like that. So in your case, Andreas, have you made some kind of experience already how long it takes usually from starting with the base until you reach like the end of your maturity level?
That's a good question. I haven't measured it, to be honest, but usually the higher you get in the maturity level, the longer it takes to like really integrate the different tools. For example, like setting up all the different rules for the static code analysis or doing performance tests. So in my experience, yeah, those kind of things here in level like 2 or 3 took more time than just like setting up, for example, a build and a deployment of the application. Yeah.
And I also think it really depends on the different methodologies you are using. So if you are in an agile project, then this might be more appealing to you. And or if you are in a traditional approach like waterfall, all these tools might be super new to you and you would need much more time to get started instead of if you were a user who was using it. So I knew from my past, I knew a couple of maturity models, but honestly for MuleSoft, I have not seen it. This is the first time I see it. And it has quite some interesting aspects, you know, which are really MuleSoft specific and are targeting this API implementation approach. So this is super nice and happy to learn more about it. Yeah.
Yeah, sure. Yeah, maybe we can go quickly through this maturity model. So if we look here at the base, what I usually implement is like a very basic source code checkout, first of all, then a build of the application, of the jar file. I'm also executing unit tests. that's always one of the first questions. Does it make sense already to like test the unit tests, or maybe to even postpone it to like one of the later levels? And then after like building the jar file, it will be then a deployment to CloudTop. And here the question is also, are you going to do it automated, for example, for the sandbox environment, so for dev and QA, and then manually for prod? Or there are even approaches where you do it also manually for, let's say, the QA environment. But this is like really just build and then deployment of the application.
Question. So check out source code. I know this is maybe a silly question, but what does it mean? So because I know some users using MuleSoft, they don't have any kind of repository in the background. They're just using it for automation. So what does it mean checking out source code?
Yeah, that's like really the step. When you check out the source code out of your Git repository or your source control repository, and you need to have it somewhere managed, right? The code. You cannot check out the code if you have just like the Mule applications at the end. So this maturity level or model really applies if you are using a source control tool at the end, like GitHub or GitLab, etc. Yeah.
Thank you.
Then, so if we go from the base to the maturity level 1, we will be adding an Artifactory. So after we build the code, we will be persisting the jar file in an Artifactory, where we can then download the the artifact again in order to deploy it, for example, to the prod environment. And as Artifactory, you can use, for example, GitHub provides an Artifactory, or for example, Nexus is one of the more famous ones, where you really have the different artifacts with the different versions, maybe even with Maven qualifiers, so major, minor, patch releases, and then you take the artifacts from there and you deploy it, for example, to the prod environment.
One question regarding Artifactories. I'm still working with customers that don't use an Artifactory. Okay, they just within the pipeline build the application and deploy the jar file to CloudTop or on-premise or whatever the target server is. So what's the main benefits of having like Maven repository where you store your binaries?
Yeah, that's a really good question. And I also got this asked from my customers as well, because setting up an Artifactory, it includes costs, for example, because you need to have Nexus, for example. And it's really a good question because it's easier if you just like build your application and you directly deploy it. The biggest advantage I see if you really store the different artifacts in an Artifactory is, for example, if you want to do a rollback on it like previous version, right? So you're going to store all your artifacts with the different versions, like the Maven qualifiers in the Artifactory. And then, for example, you notice on production, something is going wrong. You don't know why, but something is going wrong. And then you have the possibility to just like take the previous artifact, which was working, and deploy it then back to the production without like building the entire code again, right? So you can really fastly roll back to the previous version and deploy it then production. That's one of the main advantages I see.
A quick question in regards to Artifactory. I think this should be possible. JFrog is also
JFrog is also, also one of the Artifactories which we can use. Yeah, exactly.
Just one thing, Andreas, which I think is, it depends how you want to do it. Both are totally correct. In this case, maturity level 1, we say that we publish or deploy the artifacts to Nexus, for example, or JFrog, whatever it is. And as a last step, we do the deployment, which is perfectly fine. What I have made my experience with is that when you deploy it first to Artifact, and then let's say you do the deployment to Cloud Hub, and then the application fails because it has an issue, okay, something wrong. Then you have already deployed your release artifact to Nexus, and it's not really required to have it there because it's not working. So you don't want to do a rollback with this jar file. What I do personally, I do first the deployments, and when it was successful, as a last step, I upload it to the artifact, but both are fine. That's just my experience. I think.
That's actually a good point. I will get into this in the next few slides, because it doesn't make sense if you, for example, upload the artifact already for the dev environment to the Artifactory, right? Yes. So usually you do it maybe after QA, so after testing, then you upload the artifact, and then you use this artifact in order to deploy to prod. But I will get into this in the next few slides. That's actually a good question. And then maybe one general thing. I mean, this maturity model was developed by us, so by a colleague of mine and myself. But it also, I mean, feel free to also change it. There might be customers that want to define like different maturity levels. That's completely fine, right? So you could even take the performance tests to one of the to the level 1, because it's maybe one of the requirements of the company. So you can just like shift the different points. It should be just maybe like a base where you can hold on in order to like develop your entire CI/CD model.
Again, a question. So as this is a very good point, Andy, what you mentioned, that this is something which can apply to any company and they can change it. So it's a flexible model. And I would say it is even needed in the modern way of developing application, because now we are talking about, if you look into the market, we are talking about shift left security, because many developers are already using open source products. So shift left security has become very popular, but also shift left performance testing. So moving the whole performance testing part directly in the core of the development, I think these are topics which can be adapted on top of this, right?
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. We will get into this also then in the next slide, but that's absolutely correct. So just to finishing this maturity model, so I put in on level 2 the performance tests. So for example, with JMeter, where you really run performance tests on the pre-prod environment. And then on maturity level 3, which is the most mature level here in my model, we will be then also adding code quality checks with, for example, SonarQube. And we could also apply directly in the CICD pipelines, like different policies or SLAs over API Manager to our APIs. But that's, for example, something that we will be not covering now in our CICD series, because I think it's going then too far. But I also have seen customers applying those policies automatically as part of the CICD.
And I think in terms of policies, because this is really interesting, the last point which you have mentioned. So what are usually the policies that you automate, I guess, because you cannot apply to all policies, because it depends what kind of policy you need in an API. So it makes sense to automate this process for only a specific category or a specific type of policies, right?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, at the end, you need to define the policies you want to automate. It's then up to the customer or up to us to define which kind of policies. But yeah, it definitely does make sense to like just apply all the different policies on this level. Yeah. Okay, so what we will be doing in our CICD series, I tried to draft it on this slide here. So this is at the end then the entire CICD pipeline. And just to give you a quick explanation here on the left side, I added the different triggers, how the pipeline will be triggered at the end for the different environments, and like what kind of steps will then be executed on this stage of the pipeline. And if we go quickly through it, so starting on the dev environment. So I defined that now for our series, we will be deploying on every push to the dev branch. So after like a developer, there's a push on the repository, we will directly trigger the pipeline. It will check out the code. It will build the code then with Maven, and it will deploy it then to the development environment. What I won't be covering on this stage is the unit test, because I think we will be then covering it in the second series. So like really creating unit tests for our applications. And then also the secure. So Amir, you did the video the last time, you also uploaded it then to YouTube. So checking the entire security, the shift left security, which you explained before. Yeah. Also part of the first session will then be the deployment to QA. So we will be also checking out then on pull request the code. We will build it again with Maven, and we will deploy it to a different environment on our cloud hub.
Mm-hmm. So this, what we see now, marked with the blue angles. So this is going to be part of the very first video series, or a series video. Yeah.
Exactly. Okay. Exactly. This will be part of the first one. Then we go to the next one. So the second video, we will be covering those. So, I mean, if you have another recommendation, feel free to tell me so we can also adapt it a little bit. This was just like the first draft I created.
I found it super useful. You are building, first of all, as you explained in the maturity model, you are building a base. And this should be built by everyone who want to go towards CI/CD. And then on top of it, you can have your own flavors adapted. So this is
exactly
nice. Yeah.
Exactly. And that's, I mean, always if you build up a CI/CD, I mean, that's very nice if you already see like a successful build and then a successful deployment of your applications. And then you can like try to adapt and refine and redesign it, right? But first it just needs, like the basis, it needs to work. Then in the second part, we will be then adding the unit test. Yeah, we will be adding the secure one. Let me quickly cover it here again. So, this. The unit test, we will be checking the security. We will be uploading then the artifact to an Artifactory. That's something we also need to decide if we directly want to use the GitHub Artifactory, or if we maybe push it to Nexus. Yeah, that's something we need to discuss about it. And then what I would also find useful is to do some UA tests. So for example, with Postman or Newman. And testing is also a very important topic here, because usually we differentiate between different testing scenarios, right? So with unit tests, we do like the component tests where we really test the application or parts of the applications. And then we have, for example, UA tests, user acceptance tests, where we trigger our APIs from externally with Postman, and we check the entire integration at the end.
So UAT are more, yeah, how to say it, more on a not internal testing, but testing from outside, and also having different chain of APIs doing end-to-end testing, kind of this.
Exactly. Because mostly if you trigger the API from outside, you're gonna have like an experience API, a process API, and a system API. And you will be checking with Postman then all the 3 APIs, right? If you receive back the expected payload. And with munit test, you really just check or you test parts of your application or components.
And I would assume these tools which we have highlighted here, so munit for sure, it's the easiest way to do unit and system testing. But now with Newman and Postman, there could be obviously other tools possible as well, right?
There could be other tools, absolutely. So what I also have done in one of my previous projects, we wrote with Python code and the HTTP library, we wrote tests there. So we really triggered from externally the experience API, and then we checked on the downstream system if we received the data correctly. So there are different approaches how you can write all those different tests.
So this is still an automated process, all right? So in case if we do it with Postman, the pipeline will interact with Postman and do a call, which I didn't know that you can use even Postman for this.
Yes.
To do automated testing, which is really nice. Okay.
Yeah.
Just one question, because I see that the development environment you do trigger the pipeline on a push, but on QA you trigger it on a pull request. If you can explain what is the difference and why you do not do it on push everywhere.
Yeah. That's also a good question, which also differs from project to project and from customer to customer. Sometimes I have customer, they want to do everything on push. Sometimes they want to do it on pull request. In my opinion, on dev, it really makes sense to always directly deploy it, because you as a developer want to be able to test the application as fast as possible, right? So you don't want to wait for like another engineer to approve the pull request. You just want to test it, right? And then on QA, I think it always makes sense to do a pull request so that a peer can, for example, check your code first. Then it will be deployed. And on QA, usually you have like other systems or other persons testing your application, right? So you should avoid like a lot of bugs on the QA environment. So that's the reason why I usually recommend to do it then on pull request. But yeah, what's your opinion about it? Have you also done it on push as well?
Yeah, it always depends on the customer. We have customers have worked with customers that do it on push only. Yeah. But it depends how the team is set up, you know, and the development team. If everyone really trusts themselves and okay, we don't have to peer review our codes, let's do it on push, that's totally fine. But you need to be at this level, at this maturity in terms of development, which is really hard. But I also recommend, as you said, to be honest, to have a peer review. Depends on the stage, of course, and then do it only really on a pull request. And then as described already here, of course, on when you do it, a deployment on production, then usually it's like really a manual trigger of the pipeline.
Yeah, you need to have a lot of trust if you just always deploy it on push. I'm really a fan of having like 4 eyes rather than just 2 eyes, because there are always like designs or like some development approaches that everybody else in your team would do it differently or could give you some good inputs how to do it better. Yeah. And then maybe on the UA testing. So you can do it as part of your pipeline automatically, but you can also just like provide Postman collections to, for example, testers in your team, and they test the application manually. I think that's also a fine approach, because usually the entire automation thing takes quite a lot of time to implement it. So just doing it manually, I think it's also fair enough.
I think user acceptance testing is really hard to automate because you have so many edge cases that you want to test. And those edge cases cannot be covered using automated testing. Maybe, of course, a few of them, the base, but I think there will be still a lot of manual testing required when you do user acceptance testing.
Yeah, exactly.
Mm-hmm.
And then picking up the question you had before regarding the Artifactory. So as you can see here, I included the upload to the Artifactory on the QA environment and not on the dev environment. Mm-hmm. So after we really tested it on, the developers tested it on dev, we will then building it again and then upload it to the Artifactory. We could even do it, as you said before, after the UA testing, so that we ensure a better code quality. But that's always depending on the customer, on where you want to do it. Okay, so going to the next step, maturity level 2. In this case, we will be then deploying it to the staging environment, where we basically take the artifact, and the staging environment is really like the pre-prod environment. So you have most of the time the same infrastructure as you have on the production. And the most important part are then the performance tests you want to run. And in this case, we will be using then JMeter, really testing our applications on performance before we then deploy to the production environment.
Mm-hmm. Now this makes it super clear why the Artifactory is needed. For me it was because in the initial slide deck, the one which was created, the Artifactory was missing. But here, having it in the Artifactory will decouple you basically from the development part, and then you can directly deploy from the Artifactory.
Yeah, exactly. So you just really take the artifact and you're gonna tag it at the end really as a release candidate. This is the Maven qualifiers, which I mentioned before. And you deploy this release candidate then to the pre-prod environment. And if all the performance tests go well, you take exactly the same artifact, you change the Maven qualifier to really the production tag, and you deploy exactly this artifact then to production. And this would be then, our last step. Oh, I see that here is a small mistake. The secure is already done in the first part. Like this. So on maturity level 3, exactly, we will be then deploying it to the production environment. I also added here this tag qualifier, so the Maven qualifiers, which we will then adding at the end, and also maybe an update on ServiceNow or any kind of monitoring console where we can see that, we deployed an artifact to production.
But is this always a case? I was wondering if you have seen this kind of implementation where you push kind of a request into ServiceNow or GitLab, which need to be manually approved by someone?
So the manual approval here on the left side is really deploying it then to production. Because, I mean, at the end, also for staging and for production, in my opinion, you should always have somebody responsible for the deployment. Most of the time, it's like the DevOps team, and they trigger it manually. So they say, okay, these artifacts we will be taking, we trigger it manually, and then it will be deployed to staging or to the production environment. The ServiceNow update, I cannot really say if it should be automatically or manual. I don't know, have you had any kind of experience here, Michael?
No, not really. That's why I will be really interested in the session when we basically implement that. ServiceNow also, for example, not really used it, but what I wanted to ask here is when you mention tech qualifier, what exactly you mean? Okay, you mean the Maven, for example, a release candidate which can be just RC, and you append it to the jar file name, I guess, right?
Yeah.
When you
Yeah.
Okay.
Exactly. Yeah.
And when you do it then on production, what kind of tech qualifier do you use usually?
Then it will be just the numbers of like major, minor, and patch.
Okay.
And yeah, that's also something I will be then showing. But let me check if we have it here. Because there are, let us check docs. Because I have an overview, but I would need to look it up.
Yeah, we will anyway get the details then when we have these separate sessions. But
yeah, exactly.
Interesting to know. Yeah. Okay.
Yeah. So I mean, at the end, you're gonna have like those numbers, right?
Yeah.
And for the production deployment, you usually really have like 1, 2, and 1, like this example. And then for pre-prod, you would have release candidate like RC. And then, for example, for dev and for the QA environment, you have a snapshot. And this is basically the name which you change then in your Artifactory in order to like really define the different jar files in which environment they should be then deployed to. Yeah. Exactly. So if you go back here, so this would be the concept or the process we want to implement in this series. What I'm also completely aware of, so usually if you do a CICD project, you don't like implement first only for dev QA, and then you do in maturity level 2 and 3 like staging and production, because you need to have, even if you have like the base CICD setup, you somehow need to be able to deploy to production, right? I just adapted it for our video series, so we really have like a clear process and what we're gonna implement. But in the real live project, I would like do the base, so build and deployment, but then apply it for dev, QA, staging, and production. And then adding like the different components like Artifactory, code analysis, etc.
Question in regards, now we have built these kind of, it is, I think we will have around 4 videos. So at the end of the day, we would have then different pipelines built for different environments. Yeah. How are we going to monitor these pipelines? Is there something you have in GitHub Actions? Because I've not used it before.
Yes, we will have something on GitHub Actions. So we will basically set up for every environment one pipeline. So it will be dev on push, QA on pull requests, staging, and then production. And then you have the possibility on GitHub to track those different pipelines. So you have a really nice overview where you see the different steps, so building, deployment, etc., and if it was successful or not, and the entire logs as well. So if you want to troubleshoot something. So on basically every tool you use, if it's like Jenkins or Git Actions or GitLab, you always have like some kind of monitoring capabilities for the pipelines. Yeah.
Thank you.
Exactly. So that's the plan. Now, I have a question to you guys, and that's also one of the questions I usually receive from my customers in the beginning of the projects, because I always recommend to set up CI/CD very early when you start a project. And usually the answer I get is, why should we do like a very complicated CI/CD setup with all those different technologies, if we can just deploy our application with right click in Anypoint Studio and then it's deployed, right? What's your take on this one? Why should we implement maybe like CI/CD directly in the beginning of the project?
I would say it depends, but maybe Michael, Michael, we can have your different opinions. So in my case, it's really like, you know, if you are building just simple integration with less system involved, and that's exactly the customers who we are talking to who don't have those kind of capabilities with CI/CD externally set up. They really use the internal ecosystem of Mule. But customers who are going large, you know, who are building larger integration and APIs which are interacting with front ends, they usually use CICD pipelines to automate the whole process. And it definitely makes sense because the more complexity you have in your ecosystem, the more you want to automate. You don't want to do manual configuration and then lose time in order to deliver your piece of application. So that's what I have seen so far with Mule applications, where customers who really live the complex ecosystem, they use CI/CD to automate the process.
Yeah,
Michael, I don't know about you.
So in my opinion, what is the main purpose of automating things? The main purpose is to avoid human error, right? So everything they do manually by clicking and configuring, we are humans, we do errors. So that's why we have built or automated the whole integration and deployment process using CI/CD. Of course, in the beginning, a customer that just started with MuleSoft, yes, he can deploy manually using Anypoint Studio directly to CloudTop, but in the end, he will reach a specific point in time where he cannot do this manually. It's not manageable anymore, and you will end up with human errors. And that's why CI/CD is the right approach. That's why it is part of best practices to have this automated integration and deployment process. And I think this is a must for every organization that is doing developments and of course deploying it to any target system. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I agree.
But also CI/CD, what needs to be mentioned is who is responsible for setting up CI/CD? That's also a completely other topic. Is it the developers? Usually you have the DevOps team that is taking care of this. So the developers cannot do it. So they have their own thing that they need to do, which is development. So that's also always something which maybe you can end up in some clashes, responsibility. Of course, the best scenario is always you have a development team focusing on development only, and you have a DevOps team that is taking care of the whole CI/CD, setting up the whole process. But you have organizations where they do not have the resources, separate resources, a DevOps team that takes care of this. So that's why it's always good if developers have the basic know-how of how to set up a CI/CD process, not just for MuleSoft, but with any technology that you use.
I completely agree. And usually you start with a small team, right? So you probably gonna have one PO, one architect, and like 2 or 3 developers. And you're not gonna have a DevOps team at this stage, right, in the beginning of a project. So that's a really good point. In my opinion, you should also have like the basic knowledge of how to set up a CI/CD pipeline as developer. And if something goes wrong in the pipeline, you should at least be able to troubleshoot it.
Exactly.
Yeah. All right. Good. Then we are looking forward for the next few videos we will be releasing with more coding than this one here. But I think it's always important to first speak about the concept. And now we are really getting then hands-on on the pipelines, developing the different parts.
Nice.
Forward.
Thank you, Andreas. Really, it will be really interesting to see the parts, especially performance testing and so on. Yeah, thank you for the presentation.
Also from my side, I really again learned a lot. Artifactory, I have never used it, but now it makes super sense. let's see how we are going to build those video series.
Looking forward to it. All right.
Okay,
Bye,
thank
guys.
you guys. Bye-bye.